Welcome to Ohio Roots, the official podcast of the Ohio Genealogical Society. Join us as we embark on a captivating journey through Ohio's rich genealogy, history, and abundant resources. Hosted by me, OGS Executive Director Noel Poirier, this podcast brings you insightful conversations with a diverse array of guests, from OGS members, chapter leaders, and staff to renowned genealogists, historians, and influential figures within the genealogical community. Each episode delves into fascinating topics and captivating stories. So grab your headphones, hit that play button, and join us on this enthralling journey of Ohio's roots. My guest on this episode of the Ohio Roots podcast is Thomas Cirincione. He is the president of the Cleveland Italian Ancestry Organization. I was really fascinated to learn about this organization and the various programs and initiatives that they do. And it was really a lot of fun talking to Thomas about the Italian-American community in Cleveland particularly, but also in general in Ohio. And I think that you'll enjoy our conversation as well. So thank you for listening. Well, thank you so much for joining me today for the Ohio Roots podcast. I'm kind of excited about this conversation because I do some research for folks. A good friend of mine is an Italian-American, and her family's been in this country for a while. And I do research for her family history. And so I'm kind of excited to hear about what's going on with the Cleveland Italian Ancestry Organization. So before I do that, though, I want to get started with what I ask everybody when they first kind of come on the podcast is, what is it that got you interested in pursuing your own family history?
Well, thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about our organization. I actually, believe it or not, I really got the interest in genealogy going back to the 70s. I watched Roots when I was a preteen or teenager, about that time frame. Yeah. And at that time, I only had one grandparent still alive. He was an Italian immigrant, came from Sicily. And it really spurred me to really have some conversations with him as best I could as a 12 or 13-year-old to learn a little bit about the town he came from. He had a lot of old pictures. He was the oldest of a family of 11, immigrated back in the early 1900s. We looked at a lot of old photos together, and he told me who people were. And I'd always had an interest in learning about my family history. So that really spurred me to pursue genealogy. But of course, I just put it aside for many years. Made a trip to Italy in the early 80s, got some more information there, and then put it aside again. But really in earnest, I would say it was around 2000 that I really became interested and found out that there's resources available like Family Search and visiting the family history library to get some information. So that was the whole process for me to pursue my Italian roots.
Was your family originally from Cleveland? I mean, did they settle originally in Cleveland?
Actually from upstate New York. I grew up in Schenectady, New York. My mom still lives there, and that's where I grew up and spent most of my early years there. Okay.
Tell me a little bit about the Cleveland Italian Ancestry Organization. How did it start? What are its roots?
Yeah, we started around 2008, and the story was I actually presented just from my experience and spending some time at the Family History Center in Westlake, Ohio, where I live now. I did a presentation. I was a volunteer there at the Family History Center, did a presentation on Italian genealogy. And I said, I don't think there's any Italian genealogy groups in town. And there happened to be a woman who attended my presentation back in 2007. And we said, we should really start an Italian genealogy group here in town. And as luck would have it, a couple of months later, there was going to be a presentation done by a nationally renowned Italian genealogist by the name of John Coletta at the Western Reserve Historical Society here in Cleveland. So we figured that would be a good forum, since there would be a lot of people interested in Italian genealogy, to announce, talk about our group. And we made the announcement that we're starting a group. And at the turn of the calendar, 2008 in January, we had our first meeting, and we've been going ever since.
How many members do you have?
Well, we have about 70. Our dues are $25. So actually paid members, we have about 70. Okay. We have an email distribution list of about 170 people.
Oh, wow.
So
okay.
It's a growing group. Again, we're fairly young and new at this. So we're still seems young compared to other genealogy groups in town. But I should just back up for a second and mention that. So when we started, we actually started as a group called Point. And Point is pursuing our Italian names together. And it's actually it was a national organization. and there were satellite Italian genealogy clubs across the country.
Okay.
And we were actually the last one. The Cleveland one was, I forgot which chapter number, I want to say like 20 or 21. And we started, and we were affiliated with Point up until about 2014, and then or 2013, and then Point disbanded.
Okay.
But we wanted to go on. We still had a robust group. We renamed ourselves CIAO at that point, which is the Cleveland Italian Ancestry Organization.
Right.
Clever little name that we came up
Right.
with. But so we've been going ever since 2013 as CIAO. But yeah, our original roots was with Point, which again was just a national Italian genealogy group.
Okay. Were there specific neighborhoods in Cleveland that the most Italians settled in?
There actually were, and you know, I don't have as much of an appreciation for it growing up in upstate New York,
Sure.
but a lot of the folks here are Cleveland natives. Most are, and there was a Big Italy at one point. That's where the stadium, the baseball stadium now resides, and also the basketball stadium. But that area was an Italian neighborhood called Big Italy. Little Italy is still in existence, and that's where the annual Feast of the Assumption takes place in August. And then there are other Italian neighborhoods on the near east side, near west side. In fact, we're actually doing I could talk about it later if you like, but we're doing an Italian church tour in a couple of weeks where we're visiting a lot of the parishes that were around for a long time in these Italian neighborhoods that are really no longer Italian neighborhoods. Another neighborhood was Collinwood, and one of the churches is in Collinwood, which is on the near east side of Cleveland.
You know, one thing that's interested me, I live in New Philadelphia, Ohio. And one thing that interests me when I researched our local history here is how easy it was for people to transport themselves from New Philly to Cleveland and back on a regular basis in the early 1900s. Much easier, I think, than it is today. And so that mobility, you know, I'll read about a local Italian American immigrant who marries a young lady in Cleveland, but is back in New Philly and then goes back to Cleveland and then goes to Columbus. I mean, it's a fascinating how in motion that population was where the work was. And so it's just interesting to me how interconnected the community was.
Yeah, and well, not only that, to pick up on the no mobility, I mean, a lot of the immigrants at the turn of the century went back and forth several times. Usually they would leave their wife and children back in Italy and come back, you know, to work, make some money to get them back into the United States. So you saw a lot of, I know my grandfather, for one, I mean, he came here as a bachelor, went back, got married, came back. The kids, he had 2 kids, and came back and got them, or actually they came over. My grandmother came over with the 2 children. So yeah, there was a lot of mobility, which we take for granted now. We just hop on a plane and get over there. But those long journeys, which are probably not a lot of fun coming over. And
particularly if you're in steerage class or something like that.
Exactly, which most of them were.
You mentioned the church program you're working on. What are the kind of projects and initiatives that CIAO does?
Ciao, which in Italian, by the way, means both hi and bye. It's an informal form of the language. But we actually, generally speaking, we get together maybe once every other month for a meeting. And we kind of vary it. Sometimes we'll just have what we call open forum, which is just get together and talk about roadblocks or new discoveries, new websites that we found, so on and so forth. Or we'll have a speaker speak on any topics related to either genealogy, Italian genealogy, or Italian culture, really. We kind of have our secondary goal is to promote Italian culture in town. And this community is a pretty robust Italian American community. So we'll do that, and we'll also get together for a potluck lunch every year in the summertime. We'll also go to Italian restaurants in town from maybe a couple times a year, and then we do some, an occasional field trip, and that's what we're doing. We participate in the Columbus Day Parade every year.
Great.
Last 2 years at least. So we have a presence there, and what we have coming up in a couple of weeks is an Italian church tour. And as I mentioned, there's little Italian neighborhoods that are throughout Cleveland that really are no longer Italian neighborhoods, but there's 4 churches that are, Italian, have Italian roots. So we're going to visit them and just do a little tour of those churches, and then have a meeting afterwards. Trying to think what else we do. That's the by and large what we do, and there'll be a one-off situation where we'll have a get together. We'll have a speaker in town about speaking on Italian movie or Italian culture. We'll get together and go to something like that.
You mentioned kind of learning about what resources were available on researching Italian Americans, particularly in Cleveland. What have you found? I mean, what kind of resources are available right there for you in Cleveland?
Well, Family Search was pretty much the source for Italian research.
Okay.
It actually, and Ancestry as well to a lesser extent. So going back to we'll say the early 2000s, really what you could research would be the civil records of a lot of Italian cities or towns, comune as they are calling Italian. And that's when I got this bug again around 2000. I was fascinated. I found the website. I looked up what records were available for my little town, Isanello, Sicily, figuring they'd have just a few records. And they had records going back to the 1820s, civil records, and 30 different microfilms. So I was fascinated. I wanted to order all of them in the same day. I was just so excited about it. But I just kind of took a deliberate approach and kind of started from the end and from what I knew and then worked my way backwards. It was an amazing amount of information that I got from the civil records here. Now, a lot of those have been digitized, Italian records, and they've moved to another website, which is sponsored by the Italian government called Portale Antenati.
Okay.
And from this website, you could now get for free from your home computer, able to see a lot of the civil records. Now, civil records really began in earnest in Italy around 1806 in some parts of Italy. It's really when Napoleon conquered Italy. There was one of his mandates was to have civil record keeping in Italy. So that started some places like Sicily didn't start till 1820, but some parts of Italy did start around the 1820s. So in general, you have civil records which go back to as far as 1806. But then even further back are parish records, Italian parish records, and they're difficult to obtain in the United States. We've been, I pretty much exhausted all the civil records for my towns that I'm researching. Tried to get a genealogist to go to the churches, the respective churches in Italy and find some information. It's very difficult. There's not a lot of access to a lot of the churches. However, just recently, there's an Italian, it's a group called Italian Parish Records. It's really a grassroots effort coming out of a woman who started it. It was from Boston. And they're making a lot of progress in actually getting into a lot of the parishes and dioceses and able to obtain and microfilm a lot of these documents that can go back as far back as the 1500s when it was mandated by the Council of Trent. So there's these, again, the church records, parish and the civil records, but the civil records are much more easily accessible from here in the United States.
You mentioned the churches in Cleveland. What about their records? Are they available to you if you went to them to research?
That's a good question that we're probably going to find out a lot more information because we're going to have someone speaking to our group in early next year about Cleveland, about the Catholic diocese records. Yeah. And so timely question, but I'll learn a lot more because I don't know a lot about that right now.
It's just, I only asked because I was speaking to another individual who does genealogical research and she had mentioned that, church records are some of the best things for her to go through as she's looking. Particularly, she works in German and Portuguese genealogy in Europe. But I would think even here, that would be a useful tool to have in your tool belt.
Absolutely. And they're written in English, which makes it easier for
well, that gets me to another question. It's interesting because, the people writing the newspapers and the records and the enumerators were not Italians. So when you're looking at those early, say, particularly early 20th century records, when I'm researching Italian Americans and Italian American immigrants, the challenge for me is determining what I'm even looking at most of the time. Right. Because names and surnames are sometimes reversed and there's all of that. Are those I can imagine that must be incredibly challenging for you and anybody researching their Italian, immigration and Italian ancestors.
I found that the naturalization records that I found here in the United States are fairly straightforward, and a lot of the fill in the blank. And you do see a lot of that with the Napoleonic records in most cases, not all cases, but in most cases, it is really a lot of fill in the blank. So
Okay.
you see a lot of commonalities, and you don't have to be proficient at Italian. I'm certainly not. I took
Okay.
Italian way back when at college, but I certainly don't remember a lot of it. And I've been using it over the years a little bit,
Sure.
but just knowing where to find the information from
Mhm.
the documents. And again, there's a lot of similarities. And that was a good thing that Napoleon had created pretty much a framework for you to
Right.
look at. Now, some of them are handwritten completely, and that's hard
Yeah.
because again, some of the letters are different in
Sure.
Italian versus English. Some of the alphabet is different too.
Right.
There's fewer letters in the Italian alphabet, so that makes it a little challenging from that standpoint. The parish records, again, going back to the
Right.
1500s, I haven't seen a lot of them yet. I hope to see a lot more, but they're pretty much, I think anything goes. There's not a real
Yeah.
format for it. And whatever they could get obtained for paper back then,
Right.
whatever
Sure.
they could write on. So it's probably difficult to decipher. Plus, they're older records that are decaying day
Yeah.
by day here. So you have to fight that battle as well. So,
Yeah.
so I haven't looked at a lot of those, but I'm sure they're going to be a lot more
Yeah.
challenging to review.
The Ohio Roots podcast is brought to you by the Ohio Genealogical Society, the premier gateway for discovering your Ohio family history. To learn more about joining, visit www.ogs.org.
If you enjoy listening to the Ohio Roots podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could go to whatever platform it is that you listen and give us a good review. Reviews help us get more listeners and reach more people with Ohio Roots and what we're trying to do with the Ohio Genealogical Society. So please leave us a nice review, and thanks for listening. I was researching a local story recently of an Italian immigrant who a young man who moved down here from Cleveland. And he's mentioned the newspaper several times, and each time he's mentioned, same story, his name is written a different way in every one of those reports. And then I found his naturalization paperwork, which tells me exactly what his name was. And then even on his death certificate, because he unfortunately passed away when he was 24 while he was here in Dover, Ohio, they had like 3 or 4 different name words on his death certificate. And it was, which again, for me, I'm thinking, well, all these Germans who've been living in Tuscarawas County for 120 years had no idea how to spell his name.
We see that similarity too. I mean, a lot of, and then changes in names when they came over is very common. Sure. My mother's maiden name is Civitello.
Okay.
And actually back in Italy, it took me a while. I didn't even pick up on it till I looked at several records. It was Civitillo. So it was just one letter change, but it was more Americanized, I think, when they came to the United States, and they kind of Americanized it. But it was sometimes just subtle differences. But
well, I just enjoy it. I find it a lot of fun, and a lot of families, not everybody's interested in their family history. So when you find information about a family and you can pass that along to them, I just enjoy it. So it's one of the reasons I do my Italian research for my friend is just because I enjoy telling her things about her family or her mother or her grandmother, things about their family that they have no idea what it is, using what little I know about it. But it's been a lot of fun.
I'll tell you, it's very exciting. I mean, with everything now, a lot of information online, and someone who's really a novice that just wants to begin and figuring they have, a huge undertaking here, and it is a huge undertaking in some cases, but just to get them to maybe 1 or 2 generations, and sometimes I'll go into the History Center or wherever we could just do it online and find something very quickly for them.
Right.
And it's amazing. Yeah. And then it's not always that easy, but it is fun and it's gratifying to they're usually, amazed and so grateful for the information you've provided to them.
It sounds like when you talk about CIAO, it sounds like it's a growing organization, which is great because I'm sure you're aware, in the genealogical community, that's not the trend. So what is it you think CIAO is doing, or what is the appeal of CIAO that has drawn people into it?
Yeah, and I've talked to some folks in other genealogical organizations in town, and yeah, you're correct. I mean, you have the aging out in a lot of cases. I think one of the benefits to our group, and we do have folks that are, it's, generally speaking, people start doing genealogy at an older age, so that's the unfortunate part. But I mean, we do have some younger folks too in our group, but I think the ethnic genealogy groups seem to be more, I think, more robust for whatever reason. And also we started, we're still a fairly new organization. We really started in 2008, small group, and I have a full-time job, so I'm not, unfortunately, don't have all my waking hours dedicated to genealogy. I have to work as well to make a living, but I do. This is my main hobby, which I do spend a lot of time on, which I enjoy, but I'm grateful for the folks around me who help out. And we've been able to make some connections here lately. Just recently, we aligned ourselves with the Italian Sons and Daughters of America, ISDA, which has a huge membership. And it's not just Cleveland, it's, different lodges in different parts of the country, and a lot from this neck of the woods. And we've presented, and we'll be presenting on December 2nd as well to their group. So we've been able to draw some people in from that, get some interest, working with the Youngstown genealogy group, Italian genealogy group. That's helped. And also just, people know about us. I mean, there's when we started, like I mentioned at the beginning, that there were a lot of Italian groups in town, but there are none that were dedicated specifically for Italian genealogy. So we're trying to infiltrate those other Italian organizations.
That's the way to do it.
So we have that benefit to help us as well.
Well, I think you've got, you raise a really neat and really good point, I think, for people to understand is that, a lot of genealogy is things like first families and going back, to the Revolution and things like that. But there's a huge population of people in this country, mine included, who came to America much later than that, and contributed much differently than those other people did. And it's nice to see those groups being better represented in genealogy. I know even with the Ohio Genealogical Society, we're welcoming a new affiliate chapter from Cleveland, which is a Polish genealogical group. So we're very excited about that because, kind of opening up the tent, to all of the folks who want to research their family history. And so groups like CIAO, I think, are great. I celebrate my first generation or Poirier who showed up in Fall River, Massachusetts in 1870. But I don't have, I'm not interested in necessarily in anybody much before that. In terms of their American experience. So I think it's great that there's this interest and that you found a way to reach out to these other groups to kind of draw them in to kind of discover their own ancestry. I think that's a wonderful, mission.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have folks that are in multiple genealogy groups here, not just like you mentioned, the Polish group, Irish, Italian, genealogy group, and they're also in the Italian, because, you think about it, when you're in a genealogy group, you obviously come from a different country, and maybe the folks there are not real experts in that particular culture. So this group, that's what that's our thing. We're experts in Italian genealogy. We know how to do Italian genealogy. So I think that we have that common bond. And so I think that's another reason we're growing. And so.
Yeah, it's interesting because I interviewed a gentleman about a month or so ago who does research on the Ohio Jewish community and does genealogy for them. And again, it's fascinating that these groups, which contributed so much to Ohio's more recent history, tend to be kind of left on the margins when we're talking about genealogy. I look at my own town here in New Philadelphia, which in the early 20th century was chock full of Italians working in coal mines, working in the steel plants, working with the railroad. And when all of those things went away, a lot of that community went away. And it's unfortunate. But it's just interesting how they contributed so much to this community where I am. And I can only imagine a city like Cleveland, that their history here is just kind of not part of what's going on now. So it's fascinating to me that, and I feel great to know that there are groups of people out there who are keeping that alive and kind of making sure it's out there.
Right. And as you know, just like any nationality, it's becoming, as the later generations, the percentage of Italians were pretty much, I'm 100% Italian. Well, DNA will say 88%, but
that's pretty good.
But in most cases, most generations now, it's hard to find someone, a kid that's 100% Italian. So it's becoming more diluted, but, we do whatever we can to get people to, embrace their Italian roots. And I know ISDA does a lot of that. They try to promote the Italian American culture and do a lot more for that. So we're aligned with a good group there.
Yeah. It's when we were talking about your kind of genealogy origin story, you mentioned talking to your grandfather, and I think that you raised and I've heard this from everybody I've talked to about, you start with the living. Always start with the living. The dead can wait. Start with the living.
Right.
Are there specific tips or advice you would give to somebody who is maybe just starting to flesh out their Italian American ancestry?
I would just say, be persistent, start early for one thing, and trying to talk to as many people as you can. Again, I had it in the back of my mind that I was very interested, but there weren't a lot of ways to find more information, and I didn't have couldn't articulate the questions that I wish I had asked my grandfather back, 45 years ago. But so get started early, know what to ask, record it, write it down, do whatever you can. And that's the best way to start. I'm trying to get my kids interested in it. At least, I've done a lot of the hard work for them, but, and then I would, encourage folks to write their own history. Later generations will appreciate it, and no one knows more about you than you do. So be able to preserve all that is, I think, very important. There's probably a lot of good stories that no one else will know unless you put it down on pen and paper. So I would say that, and just, don't give up, be persistent, because in just doing my history, I'll find some information and then not be able to find much more about it, and typically put it aside for maybe a couple of years, come back to it, and find more information now. And now I'm off on a wild goose chase and finding something else. So you never know what you might discover. I found a great story, which I hope to put down in a manuscript at some point, about my great uncle, who's unfortunately led a life of crime in the 1920s, but righted the ship in time. But but it was, some of the stories were based on what I found in newspapers, local newspapers. But it's just, just hunting and finding and being persistent.
Thank you so much for joining me on Ohio Roots today to talk about the Cleveland Italian Ancestry Organization. I'll be sure to put a link to the organization on the podcast page at the OGS website. And again, thanks so much for talking to me today.
Well, I appreciate it, Noel. Thanks so much for your time.
That was a really fun conversation with Thomas, and I hope you learned a lot about the Cleveland Italian American and immigrant community. But also, I hope you just enjoyed hearing the stories that Thomas had to tell. And if you're interested in finding out more about the Cleveland Italian Ancestry Organization, be sure to visit their website, which Thomas gave at the end of the episode. And thank you for listening to this episode of the Ohio Roots Podcast.
The Ohio Roots Podcast is brought to you by the Ohio Genealogical Society, the premier gateway for discovering your Ohio family history. Hosted by OGS Executive Director Noel Poyer and edited by Luke Poyer. Theme song is Beautiful Ohio, recorded by Bob Stanley and his orchestra in 1944. To learn more about joining the Ohio Genealogical Society, visit www.ogs.org.